Hi and welcome back to another brand new edition of The Library is Open. So I hope you brought your library cards, my darlings. Tongue pop. And we are well into the festive season now, are we not? Whatever you may happen to be festive about or whatever you celebrate and so on and so forth. I think it's very clear that we are in the middle of winter and you know, winter looks a little different this year, but hopefully we're all managing to claw out some kind of festive spirit and, you know, stay merry, bright and safe as much as possible. So in another characteristic move that kind of typifies this channel, I've kind of thrown the festive theme out the window and gone for another double bill this week of crime, essentially, although I think less sort of, how do I want to put this, sort of typical crime. They're more sort of domestic crimes in the sense that they do deal with murder, but they're not sort of traditional murder mysteries, as it were. Neither are they cosy crime. There's something in the middle, a sort of hybrid of contemporary novels and you know, crime. Both excellent, and both have a sort of unifying theme, which I'll sort of go into now as we talk about them. So the first one is this, which I've seen all over booktube. Some people have been talking about it, so I had to get a copy, and I finally got around to reading it as those nights drew in. Is After the Silence by Louise O'Neill. It's the UK hardback edition, signed by the author there, which is lovely. And this one deals with, it's a beautiful cover, isn't it? It reminds me a little bit of, you know, them chocolates, Black Magic, you know, the box, be that as it may. And this is set on the island of Inisrun, which is an Irish island in the sense that it's not attached to the mainland or anything like that, but it is very much part of Ireland, as I understand. And this concerns this sort of insular community that are, you know, both physically and metaphorically cut off from the sort of the rest of society, and because of that, a sort of culture or tradition of storytelling has pervaded throughout, and you know, local legend and so on and so forth. And it concerns these three sisters called the Crowley Sisters, who were something of a sort of local legend, as it were. They were thought to be like the prettiest, and one in particular, Vanessa or Nessa Crowley, the prettiest of all, and she is found dead in the garden after a party. And the idea is that nobody was able to get off the island or onto the island that night because there was a big storm. So, who killed her, sort of thing. And sort of wrapped up in this are the people who hosted the party, who were the Kinsellas. Now, one of them, Keelan, is from an old family from the island, and her husband is from a very wealthy background, who I believe the family were originally from there, but they moved and then came back. They were like hotel magnates, sort of things, so a very high-powered, wealthy family. And yeah, and so the husband is Henry, and he married Keelan, and then she's sort of installed in this community, but the whole community believes that Henry is responsible for Nessa's death. And many years have gone past since this happened, and the family are sort of ostracised from the community. And there's Keelan and Henry's, Keelan's son, who is very much, how would I say this, has some mental health issues and so on and so forth, and, you know, has had quite a sort of long-suffering existence there, and you know, we sort of see Keelan's relationships with their friends that she grew up with that have become estranged because of this, and we learn about her past with her son's father, who was physically and emotionally abusive to her until she escaped, and that's when she went on to marry Henry. And into this sort of emotional morass, if you will, come this documentary film crew from Australia. They've already made one successful documentary, and they've come to sort of, they pitch it as they've come to sort of set the record straight about what happened that fateful night. So they're interviewing everybody on the island basically about what happened to Nessa, and as they sort of investigate, we investigate as well by going back and forth in the story between the time when the party happened and what was sort of going on relationship wise, which Louise O'Neill really skillfully teases out bit by bit, and then it's juxtaposed with the modern day where they're sort of dealing with this film crew being on the island and what that has to say, and about the situation and about their relationships and so on and so forth. So what struck me with this one was the skill of the storytelling and the way that, while it is, as I said at the start, very much a murder mystery in the sense that there's a crime that's happened and we don't have the answer until quite near the end. Its strength is the structuring and the teasing that never feels manipulative or orchestrated. It just feels like you're being folded into the story. And that's sort of typified from the start. Like the opening line of chapter 1 is, there were 3 of them in the beginning and we called them the Crowley girls, and they were born of this island as we were, sister children, brethren, kin, soil and bone. And then when we get to the end of the book, we realise that the whole thing has sort of been a sort of collective storytelling by the people of the island to their collective children, as it were. And the last line is, we called them the Crowley girls, so this is almost a sort of contemporary legend, as it were, but it's also so nuanced as well in terms of the characters. What Louise O'Neill does beautifully is really look as well at domestic abuse, but not just at the sort of stereotypical forms of domestic abuse and what we think it looks like, but also in a really smart way, because it's so insidious. And as we work our way through, it's like you start to notice things and think, oh, something's not right here, something is off, and you start to have suspicions, and you're never quite sure who is responsible for what, both the murder and abusive behaviour. And I think that's a real strength to this. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in the back as well about research that that the author has done into domestic abuse, which just pervades the novel in one form or another, and that's sort of what keeps you guessing as you go along. And for a lead character, because it's Keelan's story we mostly follow, who could be in less skillful hands could be incredibly frustrating, is actually absolutely relatable and very much a character that you empathise with from the first, even when she does or makes decisions that are contrary to her own well-being. You absolutely get it and understand, and this is I kind of think this is a masterpiece, to be honest. It's heavy, but it doesn't feel heavy, if that makes sense. So if that's something that sounds interesting to you, it very much is a Dark Knight, cozy fire kind of read that feels almost perfect for this time of year. Beautiful prose that isn't laboured. It's there's a drive to it, so it manages to be poetic without us going, oh, she's written that because it's poetic. That sort of beauty grounded in the everyday, which I just love. So that's the first one, After the Silence, by Louise O'Neill. The second one is very different stylistically in some respects, and it's These Women by Ivy Pochoda, which I've been wanting to get my hands on for ages because I saw it advertised, I think, originally about half a year ago, and it was the hardback edition, but I think that only came out in America, and I think they went straight to paperback in the UK. I would just like to do a little shout out for the green. I love me some green. And this is set, obviously, in America, as I say, and it concerns a community who are plagued over a period of many years by a murderer who is killing sex workers. And we see 5 different perspectives from women who, both sex workers and other people in the community, who this kind of murder spree has touched in one form or another. So we sort of start off with we start off with Dorian, who is she sort of runs a cafe truck stop where she feeds some of the girls who are street workers. And we learn that her daughter Alicia was killed, although she wasn't a sex worker. She was mistaken for one, we're led to believe, or something along those lines. And she's sort of been unable to get over that. And we also get the stories of one of the sex workers who is, or rather knew, several of the previous victims. And then we get an associate of hers who's a neighbour who's an artist who makes a sort of contemporary art exhibition about the defilement of women's bodies. But then we also get the cop who is drawn into re-investigating what was seen as a sort of unsolved series of homicides. And then also a woman who is a former sex worker who believes she's been stalked. And all these plot lines kind of coalesce together beautifully to really examine not just sex work and murder, but also women in society, and, you know, the insidiousness of misogyny and mistreatment that, you know, on the surface seems to be not attributable to that, but ultimately very much is, in terms of who gets believed, who is written off as unworthy of having their words, you know, honoured, who is allowed to take prominence. And I think this is a really... this is a big thing in true crime at the moment. I listen to a podcast called My Favourite Murder, if you're not familiar with it. It's 2 women in America who sort of tell stories about true crime, particularly ones you may not have heard of. And they were talking the other day about a documentary that's come out about Ted Bundy, the sort of prolific serial killer, and from the perspective of the women in his life. And, you know, I think what both of these books do is essentially place the victims of, you know, murder or serious crime, so on and so forth. I also include sexual assault in that, at the forefront of the story, because I think for too long the lore of trying to understand the serial killer, or even just the one-off murderer or serial rapist, whatever, has been sort of at the forefront. So there's almost a mythology and a mysticism to them. Whereas in I get it, I completely get it, because we all sort of want to understand how people operate or why these things happen. But actually, the stories, in doing so, we run the risk of either evading or, you know, sort of discarding the stories of the people who were the victims of this, or we fall into victim blaming patterns where, you know, somehow what this person did, where this person was, what they were wearing, what they do for a living is somehow part and parcel of why they were murdered. And, you know, make no mistake, at this channel, we believe that the only reason that rape happens is because people rape or sexually assault or murder. You know, doesn't matter who you are, what you do, what you wear, irrelevant. You know, and so this book in particular, but also After the Silence, really put the victims or the people left behind as well at the forefront of the picture, because that's who the story is actually about. You know, the serial killer or the criminal, whatever, is just the fulcrum around which the other stories kind of orbit, as it were. What I loved particularly about Ivy Pochoda's These Women is that I love the title for a start, because it's sort of, it's both literal and metaphorical in the sense that it is about these women, you know, but it's also a sort of half or semi-insult, isn't it, in the sense of that's how people are written off as, ugh, these women, you know what I mean, as though they are less than, as though they deserve what happens, as though they don't deserve to have tribute paid to them or for the truth to be uncovered. But I also love the very distinctive voice that she finds for each of the characters. There's only one sort of section, as it were, and it's sort of interspersed throughout as we move through the years, where she voices Philia, or Ophelia, who is the former sex worker who believes she's been stalked. We get a sort of first-person narration from her, and it feels very authentically grounded in this character, and the rest are in third person, but they each feel like they have a distinctive kind of character voice, which is, you know, you warm to some more than others, but you are never sort of feeling in any way that they are the same person that the author's just trying to mask. Does that make sense? They're all very distinctive, I guess, is my point. What Ivy Pochoda manages to do as well is to evoke sympathy and also empathy, as Louise O'Neill did with these characters, but without being overly purple in the prose, or without sort of doing like misery porn, as it were. She allows us to empathise with unlikable people, or people who are victims of circumstance, simply through the power of the writing. So I really loved this. It took me a while, this, because I think this is more consciously heavy than After the Silence, which unfolds, as I said, like a folk tale. This is more like a 60 minutes or a panorama that just happens to be fictionalised. So I really had to take my time with it in terms of, you know, portioning it out, because it doesn't feel like the sort of book you can rush through, which is not to say that it's boring in any way, shape or form. Of course it isn't. But it's more, do you know, like you have those sort of books that are, when you get a really good thriller and you can like breeze through it in a day because you just have to know what happens next. This is more of a slow burn, but ultimately really rewards your patience in doing that, and getting to the final conclusion, which Ivy Pochoda manages to tease out, so as the characters realise what's happening, you realise what's happening as well. And there is a palpable sense of menace there that's captured just beautifully without being overblown. So there you go, two sort of shouldn't be subversive but are subversive in the sort of pantheon of crime fiction and also true crime. Two kind of very different approaches to that there, both equally valid and both highly recommended by this virtual librarian. So that's it for this episode. Do put your library card somewhere safe so that it doesn't get wet, because I don't know about you, but outside at the moment it's absolutely teeming with rain, which is just delightful, as I'm sure you can imagine. Thank goodness I'm not going anywhere. My hair's kinky enough as it is. So yeah, that's it for this week, and next time I see you will be the final episode of the year, so we'll be going more traditionally festive, well, as traditionally festive as I ever get, by looking at Hiddensee, which is the story of the once and future Nutcracker by Gregory Maguire. So I hope to see you then, but until that time, do take care of yourselves, keep sniffing those pages, and be safe. Much love. Mwah.